Madam Mayor, through you, we will have a look at that, Councillor. I think there will be legal difficulties in requiring through resource consent conditions the provision of land. That would generally be through a development contribution sort of process or through a local government act process. But there can be a provision in consent conditions that says, for example, there must be space provided for that infrastructure, for that public transport. So not taking land, but the provision for it if someone else wants to use that.
But then, you know, they provide it, do they charge market rates or make money from it? I mean, I don't understand how that works. I know in Queenstown they've done some quite innovative stuff around, you know, development and affordable development, and it's probably that sort of similar kind of model, and I thought that was done through the RMA as well. So,
certainly, I can look at Queenstown and familiarise myself with that.
Phil?
Can I just ask you about B on page 125? Like, it includes public transport, but why should we not include other forms of transport like cycleways and footpaths for pedestrians in that? I'm certainly happy to add that. It's not an exhaustive list, but I realise it's including, but I just think it'd be useful to spell it out. You know, for example, safety, public safety on those public areas like footpaths and cycleways is important.
I'll look at that. I'll need to liaise with Brent around the legal implications of how far we can go with this provision, because as Brigitte pointed out, that it's always got to relate back to effects, and that the challenge is establishing that this development will have an effect on cycle provision or create a demand for more cycle.
Yeah. It's just that we may require sort of maximum, I guess, support to get cycleways in, especially in the long-term future. Thank you. And footpaths.
Yep. Glenn?
Oh, sorry. Maybe just one question that's been sitting there. When you say community infrastructure, does that refer to social housing and or affordable housing?
Need to go back and check the definition.
I know it's not about the residential chapter per se, but
I'll
Just see if it's on here. Community infrastructure definition is on the third page of what you were given out this morning, the revised chapter on definitions, page 12, which is the third page in. It says there what the definition is.
So it's land or development assets on land owned or controlled by the Territorial Authority Council to provide public amenities. Also includes land that the council will acquire for that purpose. So potentially to provide public amenity.
Yeah.
Though,
social housing. Yep. Okay.
Madam Chair, do you mind if I ask one further question of clarification through you, Mark?
Sure.
Mark, my question is about the drafting of the rule on page 16 in the third column. So the addition there is any building extension to a building or redevelopment involving more than 4,000 square metres of gross leasable floor area. My question is about when that rule kicks in. Does the rule kick in if you want to build 4,000 square metres, or does the rule kick in if you've got 4,000 square metres and you want to add anything? What I'm flagging is a possible ambiguity in the interpretation of the rule that perhaps we should clarify.
We'll clarify that. In writing this, it is intended to be individual developments of 4,000 square metres or more. The risk of it being anything above 4,000 square metres is every minor addition of 100 square metres would then trigger this rule. But happy to discuss that.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't know what 4,000 square metres represents. I mean, how much of Riccarton Mall does that represent?
A large supermarket's 2 to 3, sometimes larger. Large supermarket's 2 to 3, potentially up to 4,000 square metres.
Right.
That would be a good summation.
So it would be involving an addition of more than.
It would, as worded, it's any development individually that exceeds 4,000 square metres rather than any new developments on top of what's there. So any addition to Riccarton Mall, for instance, of 100 square metres wouldn't trigger this rule.
But it would enable, as a permitted activity, incremental growth of 3,800 square metres as a permitted activity.
Yeah.
That's right.
So they could build another supermarket and as long as it was under 4,000, they would not trigger.
That's the intention of the rule as written at the moment, but as I said, I'm open to discussion on that.
That concerned because we talked about the cumulative effect of some of these centres where you have, if they can actually incrementally increase their business by 3,900 metres every 2 years, and in 3 or 4 years you're going to have quite a chunk of commercial space that hasn't triggered any response or any issues, which is a concern. I think there needs to be, whilst I understand that rule, I think there needs to be, though, if an existing area is already consumed by a developer and they want to add on to that, that's a different scenario than someone wanting to create a new development somewhere. Because if something like Riccarton Mall or Northlands or Eastgate or the Palms, they're quite massive developments and they are very clever, and Yanni pointed out that they will just litigate till they're blue in the face until they get what they want, and I'd be concerned about that if they can just incrementally, because I mean a supermarket's a fairly large area and it does generate a lot of traffic.
There's two options then. One is that any development over any additions to what's there now triggers the consent assessment of its effects on infrastructure.
Any development that's over 4,000 metres already that wants to add even 1,000 metres on, it's triggered.
Whether we include an exception for, let's say, additions less than 100 square metres.
Well, no big developer's not going to do anything else 100 square metres.
No, but obviously.
Thinking behind the previous, what you were suggesting, was it that supermarkets will, as a matter of course, protest against other supermarkets developing anywhere and it's always a long and expensive process, or what was the thinking behind what you were suggesting?
In terms of the threshold, you mean? The 4,000 was to capture the large developments that are likely to have are more likely to have a adverse impact on community infrastructure than the smaller additions to it, to an existing development. But I take the point that there's potential for developments to be broken up and for a series of 3,900 square metre additions to be made. So we need to address that. So in that respect, this doesn't capture the cumulative effects which we need to capture.
From the sublime to the ridiculous, though, from 4,000 to 100 is an extreme drop. I actually want people to be able to get on and build some community facilities out there without stuffing around.
Yeah, but I think we're talking current developments rather than actually someone getting on cricket on doing something. So someone who's got
So this is an extension to a current development.
extension to a current development.
Or redevelopment.
Or
Because I
redevelopment.
mean,
Or new development.
The other reason for the larger size was for a 100 square metre or 250 square metre redevelopment to provide a public transport interchange or a public space is pretty nil. You need to have a scale of development in which there's some flexibility that you might actually be able to build that into it. So that was the other thinking behind the larger size, but it does have that difficulty of cumulative.
Yeah, they need to get on and do something. We've got a situation where some of these centres are so large and they are having massive traffic impacts already.
That's because there are insufficient of them, so everybody has to come to Riccarton, everybody has to go to Palm, because there's nobody else building anywhere else.
Yeah, no, it's, yeah, I'd still be concerned, honestly. I think that we need to have some controls around how they expand and what they actually put back to the community from that aspect, as well as Yanni pointed out.
Through you, Madam Chair, may I suggest that we take this away and come back perhaps at the next round, and there are a few things we need to think about, because I think it would be wrong to think of this rule as a way of achieving community facilities. That's not its primary purpose.
No, it's not the purpose of it. It's whether it has an impact on the wider community. And for me, it's that public transport link that is the vital missing cog at the moment, and the sort of wheels of public transport. That's the right
So if you
word.
could just give us a little bit more time, and we'll come back with some further suggestions.
Okay.
That you get continuous building length. So you actually create, like if you think of Riccarton, you just get one long building that people can't actually access their local neighbourhood anymore. They've got to walk for miles to get around the other side. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff around the traffic.
Yeah, no, there is.
And who owns the land?
I know.
That's what we
I
want
mean,
to keep.
the trouble is that we're playing catch up with an existing situation,
Exactly.
and it's kind of driving the commentary around this
But even-
particular chapter.
Even new
and-
developments don't.
Eh?
I think for new developments, we need to make sure that, I mean, I think there's a combination. So
Yeah,
appreciate
I mean,
playing catch up,
they
but-
all of necessity are on major thoroughfares.
Yeah.
And but the expansion does exactly as you say. It does create a barrier into the neighbourhood, and I mean the same. Well, with Northlands, you know, with the high school on the other side, it's actually not as obvious in effect as it is in Riccarton, when it's a neighbourhood right on the other side. So,
We'll come back to you with this.
yeah.
We've
Thanks.
heard the
Paul,
issues.
do we need
Along with the continuous front, though, it's actually activating that continuous
That's
front
right.
as well,
Yeah.
though,
That's
which is really, really important. And we've seen areas like, let's just take the back end of Westfield, where you've got that car park that it dominates that whole street. There's
Yep.
no activation at night. It's just ugly.
And that's why we're
actually
proposing
ugly
urban
during the
design
day as well.
rules.
Ugly during the day.
I've already shared that line from that wonderful guy that spoke at that TEDx event, that there is not enough Prozac in the world to make this place an interesting place to be. Yeah, and we need to avoid that, because there isn't enough Prozac in the world just to get through the day, actually, but there you go. Carry on.
The final point to bring to your attention on the commercial chapter amendments is one of the issues raised was the limit we put on tenancy size in neighbourhood centres, the likes of Church Corner, Bishopdale, of 450 square metres would mean that the likes of Whitcoulls, which Councillor Lonsdale pointed out, would be greater than 450 square metres. That would trigger a resource consent process for the likes of Whitcoulls. What we've reviewed the data we've got on floor space of units within our commercial centres, and found that in almost all, the majority of centres, 90% plus the tenancies are less than 500 square metres. But having said that, it's recognised that New Brighton and the other key activity centres, which are currently classified as neighbourhood centres in the rules, but I'll rectify that in light of our earlier discussion, that limit on tenancy size shouldn't apply to those key activity centres. So effectively we're more enabling in New Brighton, Barrington and North Horswell, which should address the issue in part, although in the other neighbourhood centres where we're still putting that maximum tenancy size on, the majority of tenants at the moment are less than 500. So, page 11, the top of page 11.
Just to point out, you are quite right. In any suburban or any commercial centre, they have a range of tenancies, and you are absolutely right that a lot of them actually are under that size limit. what you have to make a centre function correctly is generally as a major tenant, which you'll have as generally a supermarket or some other major brand. Second to that is mini majors, which actually then are your things like your Whitcalls and your next level down, and then you go into your your smaller sort of boutique type businesses, but they're all quite integral part of making a commercial retail centre work.
Mm. Yeah, certainly the tenancy size cap, which I should point out was 450 square metres in the previous draft, but we've changed that to 500 square metres on the basis of the data we've got. Where it excludes supermarkets and department stores to ensure we have those anchors, but the mini majors, as you call them, the Whitcalls, if they're greater than 500 square metres and they're in the likes of Church Corner, then that would trigger the need for an assessment.
All good? Right, carry on.
That's the extent of the changes I wanted to bring to your attention on the commercial chapter. There's a lot of those changes are reflected multiple times in the chapter, so you'll note the same change appears on multiple pages. So that's the extent of commercial I wanted to cover today.
Lovely, thank you. Now we're going to move on to the industrial chapter.